Prospecting is very, very important, but even more important is learning to value commercial properties. Okay. Now, before we get into the nuts and bolts of everything, does anybody know? Show of hands. How many of you guys know? Just type a 1 in the chat if you guys know who Dr. Andrew Huberman is, right? Just out of curiosity. I only learned about him maybe in the last 3 or 4 months, but he's absolutely fascinating. Very, very smart guy. He's a neuroscientist and he's out of Stanford, so he might know a thing or two. Bright guy. But what I say every week, guys, is make sure you're engaging. Make sure you're taking notes. Make sure you are typing. Make sure you're listening, watching, right? Because the value of writing by hand, according to Dr. Huberman, cannot be overstated. When we read or listen to something and then write down takeaways by hand, not by typing, it engages motor circuits in ways that deeply embed information into memory. Writing by hand, however cursory, is the best way to recall information. So how many of you would like to recall every single thing that you hear tonight that you find valuable, right? The fastest way to do that is writing it down, okay? Good old-fashioned pen and paper or pencil and paper. We like to do it a little bit old school here because, born in the 70s, that's how we did it back in the day. We had chalkboards and whatnot. So here we go, folks. Ready to get started. Ready, steady, go. So what we're going to cover tonight, right? We're going to cover valuation based on income, right? As a lot of people know that there are 3 ways to value properties. Number one, and guys, do me a favor, what's the one that's most common on the residential side of things? Because a lot of the people that are in the Facebook group, they are on the residential side of the equation. So can anybody tell me in the chat what the most common way is? It begins with a C, right? It's 2 words. Whenever someone wants to know what a 3-2 condo is worth in this building, they say, go get me the, go ahead. So go ahead and type that into the chat. What do you got? What do you got, guys? Comps, Marcella with the win. Yes. Quick on the draw. Yes, exactly. So you have comparative sales analysis, right? You have what they call, like replacement costs. Basically, insurance companies want to know if this building, heaven forbid, was blown over in a hurricane or tornado, what would it cost to replace it, right? So replacement costs. And the third, and the one that we're going to be going over tonight is going to be it's going to be an income approach, right? So the income approach is basically based on the rents that a building has, based on the operating expenses, and then based on what we call the local area cap rate. We're able to determine very accurately what a property should be worth. Okay. So next up, we're going to be going over cap rate. We're going to be going over definitions and then other important metrics when considering valuation. Okay. So first up, okay, the definition, right? You'll hear people talk about valuation. You'll hear the term underwriting, okay? All it means, it's the process of quantitatively evaluating a real estate investment for its viability and potential, okay? In layman's terms, basically, we learn how to put a price tag on a property, okay? Very, very important. Because if you can't price it right, you're never going to sell it, okay? So the basic formula, if you look on the left side, is income minus expenses equals net income. Very, very simple. Money comes in, hopefully less money goes out, and what's left over is your net income, okay? Now we're going to get a little bit further in depth, right? You have your rental income. You have your additional income. You add the 2 together to get potential gross income. Can anyone give me an idea of what additional income, let's just take like a multifamily building, because multifamily is kind of a property type that a lot of people can understand, because we've all lived in a house or an apartment at some point in our life, right? So what would be something that in an apartment building that would be considered additional income? Anybody, let's see, Merlin says parking, very good. Yeah, we got storage, good, Merlin. Yes, laundry, nice, Lewis. All right, good answers, guys. What are a couple other ones? Laundry, okay. Got it. Good. Yes, exactly. So anything that is not rent, basic, whether it's going to be vending machines, whether, coin op, coffee machine, and anything that's above and beyond rent and provides additional income for any type of property, right? So you're left with the potential gross income. That's like the max that you can make. You're going to subtract out a vacancy and collection loss, because no building is 100% occupied 100% of the time. I don't care who you are, okay? And if you are 100% of the time, it means you're way underpriced, okay? But realistically speaking, there's always going to be some chance, some probability that you're not going to be able to keep the building 100% occupied 100% of the time. So what we have to do is put in what's called a vacancy and collection loss. Think about COVID, right? Vacancy is one obvious one. People move in, people move out. It takes a couple of weeks to get a place repainted or renovated or what have you. But then there's also collection loss. And collection loss, what that is the landlord's inability to be able to collect all the money that is owed to him or her, right? So it might be one of those things where they need to be able to, like for instance, COVID is a perfect example. The state of California said, it's okay, residents, you have you get a pass for the next 6 months because we know you're not making any money. So there is a whole lot of collection loss there. A lot of people could not go in and collect the money that was owed to them, frankly, so there is in that year, there's a much higher collection loss. Okay. So you're going to take the potential gross income, you're going to subtract out vacancy and collection loss, and you're going to be left with effective gross income. Okay. Pretty straightforward so far, right? Now, what you're going to subtract out is virtually most buildings, unless they are complete and absolute triple net, which means that the tenant pays for all of the operating expenses. They're going to have operating expenses. There's going to be expenses incurred in the operation of the building. Now, typically, can anybody give me an idea of operating expenses? There are two words that we use to explain what operating expenses are. So like when you're going through it, so you can understand, okay, what constitutes an operating expense? And if you can remember these two words, and everybody, I want you to write these two words down. If you've never underwritten a property, these are the most two important words that you're going to ever hear with regard to operating expenses. They're regular and recurring. Okay. Regular and recurring. Everyone say it out loud at home. Regular and recurring. Okay. Good. Now that you've said that and probably freaked out your dog, what I want you to do is understand what makes something regular and recurring. How often is regular and recurring? Good question. So what we wind up finding out is that okay, regular is something like quarterly taxes, monthly utility bills, maybe it's an insurance bill that's paid once a year, that type of thing. Okay. There are some things that are not regular and they're not recurring. And those are a different, but yet they are still expenses, right? But those are classified different. Okay. Operating expenses, whenever you're valuing a property and you're trying to understand how it works, right? And what you want to do is you want to be on top of things and you want to know what's regular and recurring. Because if it's something that happens once every 10 years or once every 20 years, what it's going to do is it's going to lower the performance of the building. So can anybody give me an idea of what regular and recurring might look like in a building? You go ahead and put it in the chat. What's something that's not regular and recurring, but it's still an expense? What are some projects that happen every 5 or 10 or 15 years? Let's see what we got here. Lara, roof. Yes. Roof. Melissa, HVAC. Yes. Good. Yes. You guys get it. AC, 100%. Yeah. How about resurfacing a parking lot, right? How about painting? Yeah, good. You guys get it. Yes, electrical. Yeah, if you're going to upgrade the panel or something like that. Okay. So they're not regular. They're not recurring. They happen every once in a while. Yes, they are expenses, but it's not going to be a regular or recurring expense. Good. You guys are getting this. Okay. So once you are able to parse those two things out, you're able to remove the operating expenses from the effective gross income, and you are left with net operating income, or as everyone likes to call it, NOI. Okay, great. NOI, super fun word. The most important thing you're going to understand, guys, NOI is what every investor wants to know. They say, how's this building operating? What's the NOI? What's the NOI? What's the NOI, right? So very, very important to understand. Now that you guys kind of have a cursory example, right? Like we talked about, rental income comes from tenants. Additional income comes from laundry, parking, et cetera, right? Collection loss comes from non-paying tenants. Operating expenses can be taxes, insurance, lawn maintenance, CAM, snow removal, utilities. Can anybody think of anything above and beyond that? Let's talk about that. Go ahead and put something in there. What is an operating expense that's not tax, insurance, CAM, lawn, snow removal, utilities? Anybody else? Anyone? Bueller. How about janitorial, guys? How about that? Melissa, pool. Love it. Good stuff. Yeah. Good stuff. Yes. Joe says mortgage. Typically, we don't consider debt service part of the it is an expense, but it's not when you're figuring out the building because everybody's debt service is going to be different. So we usually don't account for it within the operating expenses, right? It is regular and it is recurring, but not typically what we're going to be seeing, right? Okay, cool. So security, ooh, good one, Phil. Yeah, love that. Okay, so you guys get the idea, right? Money comes in, money goes out in the form of operating expenses, which are regular and recurring, and what's left over is NOI. Now, that's kind of like the basics, right? So what I wanted to walk you through are just some of the more commonplace ones, right? Have you guys ever heard of like the 80-20 rule, right? We want to give you the stuff that's going to occur 80% of the time, right? And of these four, of capitalization rate, gross rent multiplier, cash on cash, and internal rate of return, or IRR, realistically speaking, if you know capitalization rate and understand it inside and out, that's going to help you 80+% of the time. Anyone that talks about gross rent multiplier, they read a textbook and don't actually do this in the real world. Anyone that talks about cash on cash, okay, all right. But internal rate of return, you're typically only going to see this with some more of your much more sophisticated investors. And that's beyond the scope of today's training. What I want to give you guys is the stuff that's going to allow you to take, implement, and actually go price a building. And internal rate of return and cash on cash are a little bit too lofty for what we're doing. We want to be able to look at a property and know, okay, with this income, with these expenses, with this NOI, and with this cap rate, this is what the property is worth. Okay. And that's how we figure it out using capitalization rate. But okay, what in the world's a cap rate? Ask my man, Irv. Who's Irv, right? Capitalization rate is the relationship between an income producing property's net operating income and its value, or the purchase price, right? The formula is net operating income divided by purchase price. Remember it this way, folks. When I took my CCIM courses, right? What they wanted to explain is like, it is nothing more than a snapshot in time. It's just the relationship between the value of the NOI to the value. It's the relationship between the two. Now, here's what's cool. Here's what's kind of interesting. What you want to understand is, okay, your cap rate can change. Okay, if yesterday you had $10,000 of operating expenses for the year, whatever, and then last night a blizzard comes and blows 2 feet of snow, drops 2 feet of snow in, and you got to pay a whole bunch of money. You got to pay several $1,000s to have a snow plower come in and plow the place. Guess what happens? Operating expenses just went up, okay? And then guess what happens? The NOI goes down. And what do you think happened to the building? The value of the building, in theory, with the same cap rate, the cap rate changes, right? The value of the building is still the same, but the expenses have gone up, okay? So it's going to affect the valuation of the building. So just know that cap rate is just a snapshot in time. It's not a static thing that's like, it's a 7 cap today. A week later, it could be something different because the relationship between the NOI and the value of the property has changed. But if to give you guys kind of like a real good rudimentary example, right? You take an NOI of $70,000, okay? And you divide it by $1 million, okay? You solve for the cap rate, and that cap rate is going to be 7%. That makes sense, guys? You invest $100, you get $7 back every year at a 7% cap rate. So far, so good? Sadite? All right, good stuff. Okay, now, what we want to be able to understand, okay, IRV is a formula used when valuing income producing properties, okay? So I just gave you one version of that formula. If you know 2 of the 3 variables, you can figure out the third, just like any sort of algebra, right? So IRV stands for I, income, R, rate, and V, value, IRV, right? Yeah, guys, and if you guys are watching this and want to make sure you get a recording, not a problem. We'll make sure we get it out to you. We'll be sending everybody an email that's here today and so forth. So, guys, if you're liking these types of trainings, okay, and you're getting value out of this, go ahead and type in #value, right? If you want to learn more how to do this really in depth so you can do it off the top of your head, type in #value. Very, very important. This is what we help our students with. We share this like every 4 weeks. We go through in our training program and do this for our inner circle students, right? Okay. So very, very important to understand this valuation process. Okay. So let's go back to IRV. We have I, we have R, we have V. I is income, also net operating income. R is the rate as a percentage, aka cap rate. Some people call it rate of return. Technically, cap rate changes. There are some people that are real sticklers for the definitions, right? And V is value, whether it's asking price or purchase price. That's what V represents in that 3-variable scenario. Okay. Now, the formula is expressed in 3 ways. If you know the value and you know the income, you can figure out the rate. Okay. So rate equals income divided by value. So like we just went through, right? Another example is the rate is equal to $75,000 is the income. The value of the building, the asking price, is $1 million. Therefore, we know the rate is 7.5%, or 0.075 is expressed as a decimal. You guys with me so far? Should be relatively easy. Now, let's get it. Let's invert this bad boy. Okay. So the other way you could do it is if you know the income, you can figure out the value. Okay. So for instance, if the same building is producing annually $100,000 income and the cap rate, we'll call it, is 8%, then the value equals 100,000 divided by 0.08, or $1.250 million. When you use this formula, okay, is when, let's say you're shopping with a buyer, right? I recommend you work with sellers as much as possible. But if for some chance you can't, no worries. You're working with a buyer and they say, and they're looking for properties at a 7 cap or an 8, in this case, an 8 cap, okay? And you go to the broker and you say, what's the NOI? Because now you know the cool catchphrase for all the cool kids, right? So you say, what's the NOI, Mr. Broker, Mr. Selling Broker? And he says, it's $100,000. Well, you say, okay, well, $100,000 is what the building is bringing in, okay? Because income minus expenses is going to equal operating expenses equals your NOI. And then you're going to apply a cap rate to it to capitalize it. So what you're going to do is you're going to take the 100,000 and you're going to divide it by whatever the cap rate was for that particular buyer. Okay. Very simple, folks. So now you use this version of the formula to be able to price what an investor is willing to spend on it. Okay. So let's do a little math at home, guys. All right. We're going off script. We're getting a little cray here. All right. What we want to do is we want to take, let's just say one buyer you're working with looks at this building and he says, okay, at an 8 cap, it's 1.25 million. Okay, cool. All right. Now we're going to take the same building and the next guy, he's like, no. I will only buy it if it's an 8.5 cap. Only. All right, folks, let's do a little bit of math and go ahead and put it in the chat. What is $100,000 worth of NOI, right? What is an investor willing to pay for it if they want to receive an 8.5% rate of return, or if they want to buy it at an 8.5 cap? Let's do the math. I don't even know what it is. I'm doing the math myself. So 8.5 cap. All right, go ahead and put it in. So remember the formula goes, you take the NOI, which is $100,000, you divide it by the cap rate, and what do you come up with? Dun, dun, dun. Yeah. All right. I'll give everybody a couple seconds. Show me what you got. Show me what you got. Come on. So far, we only got Lewis and Artiste. And okay, here we go, Marcella. Okay, good. Come on, folks. Don't be shy. Get those calculators out. All right. Okay, good. I'm liking it. Yes, guys. Yes. Okay. What you're seeing here, right, is 1.176470, blah, blah, blah. Okay. That is what one particular investor is willing to spend on that property. And I always tell people, okay, just like beauty is in the eye of the beholder, value is in the eye of the investor. Okay. Very, very important to say. So, okay. So let's take the next one then, folks. Okay. Let's look at gross rent multiplier. This is not used nearly as much, but every once in a while you'll get some investor, if they're going to try to test you, they'll tell you, well, tell me what the gross rent multiplier of this property is. If they do, just know that they read it in some textbook, because it's not something that we use all the time, but it is good to know. This is just the ratio of the price of a real estate investment to its annual rental income before accounting for expenses such as property tax, insurance, and utilities, right? The GRM is the number of years the property would take to pay itself off if the gross rents were received, right? Now, in gross rents received. Now, does anybody want me to shoot a gaping hole in this, right? They teach it in every single textbook. There's some investors that they think they want to be snazzy and they're going to be like, oh, tell me what the GRM of this is. And I'm trying to stump you, right? I'll tell you how I can blow a gaping hole in this particular one and why cap rate is the way to go, okay? Building A is worth $50,000 worth of NOI, or I should say brings in $50,000 of NOI. Building B, I'm sorry, take it back. Building A has $100,000 of gross income. Building B, same age, built by the same builder, same street, next door, has the same income. Okay, you with me so far? Cool. Now, I'm sorry, so it has the same, gross income, right? Now, building A is run really, really well. Okay, they're two brothers, but one is a much better manager than the other one. Okay, so what you have is this building brings in $100,000 of gross income, and this one brings in $100,000 of gross income. Okay, so now what's interesting though, right? If they're asking $1 million for the building, and the building is bringing in $100,000, the GRM would be 10 because 100,000 times 10 equals $1 million. Okay. So by understanding the gross rent multiplier, it's the exact same for these two identical buildings owned by twin brothers, right? Okay. Identical twin brothers. How about that? So on paper, if you're like, oh, show me what the GRM is. Well, 123 Main Street is this, 125 Main Street is that. They're identical. Now I'm going to blow a hole in it. This building brings in $100,000 and it has $20,000 of operating expenses, which means its NOI is $80,000. This brother, he drinks Mai Tais on the beach and doesn't pay attention to his properties, and he just lets things run amok, right? He brings in a property management company, spends all kinds of money, and doesn't take care of his bottom line. And though he brings in $100,000, he's got $60,000 of operating expenses, which means he's left with an NOI of $40,000. So this brother takes care of his stuff, $80,000 of NOI. This brother, not so much, and he's at $40,000. But according to the gross rent multiplier, they are equal. They are viewed the same because it's the number of years it would take to pay for the building if the gross rents were received. But gross rents are not, they're what you make. They're not what you keep in your pocket. With me, guys? Okay. So by the capitalization method, right? This building, the $80,000 NOI, and this building, the $40,000 NOI at the same cap rate, guess what? This one's worth twice the amount of this one. With me, guys? Does that make sense to everybody? Type a 1 in the chat for me, folks, if you can, if that makes sense to you. Okay. Sofiane, a great question. How do you detect an overestimated NOI? Really, really good. Okay. So I will take that question and I'll turn it upside down. The way you detect whether an NOI seems overestimated, right, just remember it's money in minus expenses, operating expenses equals NOI. The way an NOI is overestimated is if the operating expenses are underestimated. Okay. Now here's something cool. Here in the Miami market, let's say, right? I sell 4 different property types, and what we notice, right? And I'm just going to throw out ballpark numbers, right? There are more rules of thumb. It's going to be different in your area, but the rules of thumb are going to remain the same no matter where you are, right? So like insurance in Florida might be a lot more expensive than, let's say, Idaho, I don't know, or Arizona, whatever. But the point is, right? For industrial buildings, it's a box with 10% of it being office. It takes very little to maintain it, as opposed to a high-end luxury multifamily property that has fountains and marble floors and all this other stuff. You need tennis courts and gyms and all those things. So my point is, right, what you need to understand is there's a sliding scale for what your operating expenses are. So in Miami, let's say, your operating expenses for a commercial property might be between, an industrial property might be between like 31 and 33% of the gross. Okay. But if someone says, oh, they're knowing that they're between 31 and 33% of the gross, but yet they're telling you that their operating expenses are 20% of the gross. Well, that's how we know that they're overestimating. Just like everybody thinks that their baby is a little prettier than everybody else's, right? I call it the beautiful baby syndrome. Like everybody, like no one thinks their baby's ugly, right? We call it the beautiful baby syndrome because my baby's just a little bit more beautiful than my neighbor's, right? Similarly, every landlord, bar none, like or I should say way underestimates what their expenses typically are. So it's very, very important to understand. You need to look with a critical eye. Do not take operating expenses at face value. 9 times out of 10, people underestimate. They forget, oh yeah, I do pay for that. Oh yeah, I do pay for that. Oh yeah. And one thing to understand is when you're valuing a property for, even if they gave you everything accurately, okay, what you need to realize also is that the NOI that this particular, even if everything was completely factual, which 9 times out of 10 it's not, it's not accurate, I should say. 9 times out of 10, they're going to underestimate the operating expenses, which is going to increase the NOI. It's going to artificially inflate the price. But remember this, the NOI that this owner enjoys is not necessarily going to be the NOI that the next owner enjoys. And there's a very simple reason. We have this funny little thing here in the United States called property taxes, right? And if Mr. Jones bought this property at $70,000 back in 1984 and he sells it for $2 million, guess what? The tax base probably isn't keeping up with how quickly the value has increased over the years. So maybe his assessed value is, instead of being 2.2, is like 1.5. Well, guess what? When that building sells for 2.2, maybe not in year 1, but in year 2, there's a high chance that those taxes are going to go up. And rightfully so. Like if the tax base is 1.5 and the building sells for 2.2, guess what? There's a pretty big gap there. So property taxes that the next owner will have, this current owner has a low assessed rating, but the next owner is likely to get a decent bump in year 2 to the property taxes. So that's going to be, the NOI is going to be impacted by that. So whatever Mr. Jones, who's owned it for 30 years, is enjoying, it's likely not going to be the same. So there's a certain amount of like downward regulating that to adjust for the increase in taxes. Does everybody understand that? Any questions? I see. How do we? Let's see. Boom, boom, boom. Yeah. Good. Okay. Awesome. And anyone else have any questions? That was a really, really good question. Something that we don't see all the time. Okay. So just want to let you guys know, I want you to be aware of it so you don't really need to get into it. Gross rent multiplier, not a very good indicator of value, right? As I mentioned, two buildings that are $1 million and the gross rental income is 100,000. Guess what? It's not going to be a very good indicator because the operating expenses are not taken into account. Okay. Very, very important. A lot of people like to talk about cash on cash return, right? This is the rate of return often used in real estate transactions that calculates the cash income earned on the cash income invested in a property. Okay. So the formula equals annual pre-tax cash flow minus total cash invested, or divided by total cash invested. So put it this way, right? If you had a property, we'll do it very, very simple. You buy $1 million property and you put $500,000 down. You put 50% down. Okay. Now, let's say that, or actually in this one is, I think it's $1 million property. Let's see. Yeah. So let's say you got a pre-tax cash flow of $100,000 with $700,000 invested, right? You take 100,000 and you divide it by 700,000. So basically, what's coming out in pre-tax cash flow divided by what you put into it, and you're going to know that your cash on cash is 14.28%. Does that make sense, everybody? So far, so good? Yeah. Okay. Good stuff. All right. So cash on cash. Some people like to utilize it. Capitalization rate and cash on cash are the two most, with basically cap rate being used 5 to 8 times more than cash on cash. Some people like to understand cash on cash. But what's most important, if you understand capitalization rate, if you understand IRV, right? The income, the rate, and the value, if you can understand that inside and out, you'll be able to sell tens of millions of dollars of income producing real estate per year. Okay. Internal rate of return, Basically, it's the percentage rate earned on each dollar invested for the period of time that it was invested. Again, IRR is beyond the scope of kind of what we do. It's used by institutional investors, and those guys, they do their own calculations anyhow based on their own variables. So the only type of people that really ask for it are the very sophisticated guys. And you just need to be aware of what it is. You could go years without being asked to calculate this. But if you're just getting started, you're just trying to understand, remember, income minus expenses equals NOI. NOI divided by cap rate is going to give you the value. If you can remember that and know it intuitively, guys, very, very simple process. You can make a lot of money with just the basics, like Vince Lombardi talks about, just the basics, just blocking and tackling. That if you stick to the basics, you can do very, very well in this business. We don't have to get too fancy. All right, folks. Well, thank you so much for coming. Really appreciate it. Tonight, we covered property valuation based on income. We talked about cap rate. We talked about definitions. Why not use before and after tax IRR, NPV? Yeah, all that stuff, Phil, is good and dandy, right? But we don't. Number one, I am not a CPA, and probably not too many CPAs on here, so I don't recommend anyone listening to this starts talking about before and after tax, right? And also, when you're talking about net present value, the majority of the people that are on here are not to the level. If we're talking about not going to be needing, because most people aren't dealing with institutional investors, and frankly, most mom and pops have no idea what IRR is, no idea what NPV is, and so it's not really. It's like talking astro science when you just need to talk about multiplication and division, right? You can have a very, very successful career without even knowing any of those items because they come up so infrequently. It's like everyone here probably took, like, I don't know, high school algebra, quadratic equation, trigonometry, but you're never going to make $1 from learning the cosine, sine, or tangent of a circle, right? Good to know, but you're never going to make $1 doing it. But guess how many of you have QuickBooks and know multiplication, addition, subtraction? That's all you really need. And the same goes in real estate. If you know the basics and can do them very, very well, you don't need much more than that. And I highly recommend staying away from any sort of tax implications, because our job is to bring buyers and sellers together. Our job is not to make any sort of statements based on tax implications. You can get yourself into hot water, and people are very, very litigious nowadays. Sophie says, what about hotel deals? Should we use IRR? Here's the thing. When you start dealing with sophisticated investors, right? IRR is good to know, but I guarantee you, if an investor is sophisticated enough to be asking you about IRR, they're doing their own calculations. Argus is this program. It's a very expensive program, and they use for financial modeling. And what you'll find is the people that are going to be asking you those questions, they're going to be doing their own calculations based on their own variables and what happens in year 3 and what's the acquisition cap rate, what's the disposition cap rate, all that good stuff. But at the end of the day, for a small hotel, Sofiane, nah, just straight up cap rate. Because any investor in a hotel who's an operator, they're going to know what they're going to be able to be capable of in terms of what they can do with the building. They can look at the vacancy. They can look at the total stays per month and know what they, as an operator, will be able to do. Good stuff. Awesome, guys. Well, thank you so much for tuning in. Really, really appreciate you. Keep coming back every week, folks. We are here to give you value, okay?